West is in a very different mold. We've made a lot of changes. This aligns very, very closely with our global LA Summit that we do in the spring. And what we've tried to do is to make this event much more accessible to our full membership, added some new formats, including TED-style talks, and especially panels with members working on exciting projects with the Pacific Council. I want to offer special thanks to Steve Miska, who shared his work on protecting soft networks this morning, and also to Rich Getz, Michelle Kazarian, Judge Robert Bonner, and Ted Terrell for the work that they're doing on the Guantanamo Bay Task Force. And if you'd like to see the latest task force report, just ask any one of us and we would be delighted to share a copy with you. There are two ways that our members are having a broader impact in partnership with the Pacific Council. One way, and we just have tried to facilitate this, is members want to meet one another. So I hope you were able to get to meet some of your fellow members over coffee and cocktails this afternoon. Part of what we do is to try to get like-minded individuals who are interested in international affairs to get to know one another. And one of our directors said to us, it can be pretty lonely in LA if you're interested in international affairs, which may or may not be true, but our members like to get to know one another, and we want to make that happen. Now, I know we're all looking forward to tonight's keynote speaker, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong of the LA Times. And on a personal note, is Scott Kraft here? Scott, you're somewhere, right? All right, Scott Kraft, who is the new managing editor of the LA Times, will attest that at every Pacific Council event where there is an LA Times journalist in residence, and we have a lot of them as members, we always make this big speech, an impassioned speech on behalf of the LA Times and on behalf of local ownership. Local ownership. So we're here to celebrate that tonight, that someone who actually lives here, who cares about this community, is actually directing our newspaper. They've already opened a bureau in Singapore. I mean, all sorts of great stuff is happening. And to Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, I want to say the Pacific Council has your back. Anything you need, come to us. We are your groupies. And I have read the Los Angeles Times online in, dozens of countries except North Korea, where I couldn't get it, but in lots of places. So we're really pleased to have you. What I want to do tonight is share my vision, our vision of the Pacific Council in the years ahead. On 2020, we're going to celebrate our 25th anniversary, and I'd like to share with you my thoughts on how we plan to chart our course for the decade to come. Our geopolitical world has changed profoundly, and certainly in dramatic ways since the Pacific Council was founded almost 25 years ago, which in dog years is a lot, and in international affairs years, it's a lot. We've been around for quite a while, and the world has changed profoundly. At the same time, the demographic makeup of our country, and of course of Los Angeles, has changed dramatically as well. So that these changes involving people and policies really need to be better understood and better aligned, so that we really need to change our approach to dealing with these issues as a membership organization. The Pacific Council seeks to reflect the character and makeup of our community through our membership, through our management, our staff, and our programming. And to this end, we are audaciously striving to change the face of global affairs by bringing new faces, new voices into the still narrow and very hothouse world of international affairs and foreign policy formulation. This is done by a rather small group of people with relatively similar backgrounds who do not necessarily reflect our country or our community as much as it should. We are deeply committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion for a whole variety of reasons. One of which is simply, we're in Los Angeles. It's a hub for innovation, it's a laboratory for future policy, and it's often said that LA is America, but only sooner. Or put differently, in Los Angeles, that's where the rubber hits the sky. So this is a very different and special place. This is where we live, this is our home. I mean, we have members all over, but we need to be cognizant of that. The Pacific Council actually is a key shaper of California's culture. And it's important that we need to bring the practice of international affairs along with us. And this is something that if we don't do it, it's not going to be done. More diverse perspectives lead to stronger policies and better equipped decision makers to formulate them. And in particular, we're interested in younger members of our community because the next generation is the future of leadership locally, nationally, and globally. We've done spent a lot of time having focus groups and meeting with our younger members, and we learned a great deal. They want to have an impact. They are mission-driven. They want to do something. They are very action-oriented. And unlike a lot of us, they're not satisfied with going to hear the ambassador from, wherever give a speech to sort of, nod sagely and to go home. It's just not, they actually want to get involved. They want to do something. They want to be in the game. So I think it's important for us as an organization to try and cultivate and channel these interests and give them an opportunity to be part of the policy-making process rather than the policy witnessing process. It's a subtle but really, really important difference. So for us, inclusivity is the name of the game. We want to be a leader in the international affairs community, and to fail in this goal is to quickly become irrelevant. California has the 5th largest economy in the world. Los Angeles County has the 17th largest economy in the world. So for us not to be part of the international affairs game makes very little sense. We are the only Asian, Latin American, American city on the planet. We are closer to Mexico City than we are to Washington in terms of distance. Mexico may be a different country, but we share a region with Mexico that we don't share with Cleveland. Or places back east. So we understand this. We need to act on it. It needs to define everything that we do. We've already begun this process, so that 10% of our new members are young professionals or emerging leaders. 17% of our total membership reflects this orientation. So we've already made considerable progress. We've also heard you, our members. We're small enough that you can actually tell us things and we can actually listen, react, and respond. I mean, this organization is not so large that we can ignore our members, and nor do we wish to. So we've heard things from our members and we've acted on them. Some of us noticed, a number of us, that occasionally we'd have panels populated exclusively by males. We call them manels. We simply don't have manels anymore. Just never happens. It's that simple. Today, 50% of our speakers were women, and we're trying to elevate that number again simply because we think it makes for a more interesting experience. One of the things about inclusivity that is important is it's in no way a partisan issue. The two sides of the aisle have enough stuff to fight about, and if they don't, they'll create one. This is not one to, that either side really should disagree. Everybody can understand the concept of inclusivity and should be supporting it. Now, at this point, I want to direct you to postcards on the table that share information about our annual giving campaign, which we call Pay It Forward. And specifically, for the last 2 years, we have used the Pay It Forward funds to underwrite special activities exclusively for our young professionals. We sent a delegation of young leaders to Mexico City. I was not invited, therefore the trip was a huge success. And if you look at the biographies of the people that went, it was a very, very impressive group. People from the Los Angeles Rams, from Uber, from all sorts of well-known businesses and organizations were there. So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to do. We also have lots of webinars, seminars. In fact, we're engaged in doing things that are much more hands-on. We had a seminar this morning on cross-cultural negotiations. We had another one on how you measure things. We had another one on negotiations. We have a virtual book club. These were things that a lot of our younger members actually, they wanted a much more tangible experience than hearing, me give a talk about, Saudi Arabia, encouraging people to stay out of Saudi consulates. I mean, there's always room for that, but at the end of the day, they're looking for something else, and it's important for us to do it. This work is really important for me as the leader of the Pacific Council, and I regard supporting the next generation of global leaders as a very, very special responsibility. As we approach our 25th anniversary, I am really excited about how far we've come as an organization, and I'm equally as encouraged by the direction in which we're heading. I am asking you, and I really mean this, keep us honest. If there are things that we do or don't do that could benefit from improvement, by all means, let us know. Our staff reflects, many of the qualities that that I've been talking about today. They're, very, very diverse and from all backgrounds and all fields. We benefit from feedback. We want to hear about it. We would like to hear about it. And we want to basically bring exciting new voices to the table to change the face of global affairs. I want to thank all of our speakers today. I want to thank the members of our staff. I want to offer special thanks to our co-chairs, Ambassador Rock Schnabel, Mark Nathanson, and I want to thank all of you for being here. I now want to introduce the chair of our board, the co-chair of our board of directors, Mark Nathanson, who will take us to the next part of our program. And again, thank you all for coming.
Now? Oh, okay.
Both of us?
Hi, everybody.
Thanks.
On behalf of my co-chair, Rock Schnabel, I'm Mark Nathanson. When Jane and I were in Croatia on a cruise, we read that the LA Times had been sold to our friend, Patrick and Michelle. We were so excited because all of us here who are interested in international affairs and the world around us know that LA is a global city, and we need a great newspaper, a global newspaper, and it will only be successful with local ownership. I couldn't be more happy that Patrick brought the LA Times and the San Diego Union. Let me tell you a little bit about Patrick Soon-Shiong. He is chairman of networks and owner of the LA Times and the San Diego Union Tribune and many other companies. He and his wife, Michelle, were born and raised in apartheid South Africa, so he knows something about wanting to have a free and independent press. Patrick is a very, very smart man. He graduated 4th in his college class. He got his medical degree at age 23. In 1979, he moved to Canada, got a master's degree, and then moved in 83 to Los Angeles to UCLA to complete his surgical training. He was on the faculty of UCLA Medical School and a top transplant surgeon from 1984 to 87. In 1991, he started a string of successful pharmaceutical and bioscience firms. He founded Nat Health in 2007, Nat Worth in 2011. Besides the LA Times, as I said, he is an investor in many companies, and him and his wife, Michelle, are philanthropists and very dedicated to Southern California. They have 2 children, and I have met his daughter, Nika. She is equally interested in international relations and has a master's degree from Stanford in that field. So as we look ahead, as Jerry talked about the Pacific Council, I predict there's going to be a great, great partnership between the LA Times and the Pacific Council. To find out more, we're going to have a very special person interview Patrick. She is a graduate of our own Harvard Westlake and then went on to Harvard University. Jessica Yellin, who Jane and I have known since she was a child, is a former chief White House correspondent for CNN and had spent 17 years in broadcast journalism. She's interviewed 4 presidents of the United States. She came back to LA where she's authored a book which is coming out early next year called Savage News. But all of you can follow her right now on Instagram.
Good job, Mark. Well done.
Jessica, I turn it over to you.
Well done. Well, thank you for being here tonight and also for buying the LA Times. We are, as a journalist and a lifelong Angelino, we cannot thank you enough.
Thank you, thank you. Well, thank you for having me.
So I want to get quickly to your vision for the LA Times, but I think it helps to sort of ground us in understanding a little bit about who you are and where you come from. And the first question I had when I read that you bought the LA Times is, why does he want it and what does he plan to do, right? And your profile is not the typical profile of a media mogul. You were born in South Africa, as Mark said. Your parents were immigrants there, and you had an experience with newspapers there. I have a feeling this might be a connection to the LA Times. Would you talk about your life then?
Well, my experience with newspapers, frankly, is what forged me as a South African in apartheid was the newspaper. So Donald Woods was one of the editors, and these were going against the government under house arrest. And from our perspective, what inspired me as a student and somebody who grew up no vote, no ability to own property, not sure whether I'm white, black, Asian, and what informed me was this paper. It's hard to believe, but South Africa did not have TV, so I, as a human being, as a person in South Africa, did not see TV until the age of 18 or 19.
Wow.
So it said then the only thing that informed me was this paper. Part of my way of actually making a living, believe it or not, was to sell newspapers. So I would go to the Evening Post at night in the evenings as a young kid, 12, all the way till 18, and collect these papers off the printing press and run through the city. So I love the paper, and this was in my blood, it really is.
Mm-hmm. I read that you were the first non-white doctor allowed to practice, which is at the Johannesburg General Hospital. And you said from that time you came to love underdogs. Did you see the LA Times as an underdog?
Very much so, frankly. More than an underdog, actually, it was almost existential, which is what I was worried about.
Mm-hmm. You have a truly fascinating history. I think the easiest way to speed through some of your accomplishments is to just quickly read from a recent profile of you, which said that you lived in Los Angeles for 38 years, you hold a small ownership stake in the Lakers, you run a cluster of healthcare companies, operate a cutting-edge biotech lab, rescued 6 small California hospitals, has pioneered medical treatments, performed scientific experiments for NASA's space shuttle program, and performed the first pancreas transplant on the West Coast. I hear you're also good at basketball. What is it that drives your unusual success?
I think it's just a passion of curiosity, and really I think of myself as a physician and a biologist and a scientist. And I think we've been given a gift that really I have this almost insatiable curiosity and ability to integrate very complex ideas that hopefully can transform into impact for humanity. So to me, that drives me, and every day I see something that I said, wow, if I put that and that together at scale, maybe that could make impact. And it's very hard to say no to that project as I begin to see it. So fortunately or unfortunately, and I think that's my curse, I run a lot of thought experiments in my head that I quickly translate, and the LA Times is one of them, actually.
So there are many philanthropists who looked at the LA Times over the years and were also wanted to have an impact, but ultimately passed on it. What do you see that they didn't?
Well, you may not realize, but in 2012, Kathy Thompson was and she's passed away since, was the publisher. By that time, we had invented a technology called machine vision. And I wanted to make the LA Times in 2012 the Harry Potter, where any image could actually be looked with the phone and a video would appear. We did the pilot, believe it or not. The Olympics on LA Times, and we did the pilot, and Scott may remember that, he was in the audience. And the question was, would any person actually take a phone and use the camera? So we were way ahead of our time.
How long ago was that?
2012. I passionately believe that this paper is not just a paper, it's a brand that informs, engages, and we need to actually transform this information into forms that the fourth industrial revolution is taking us into with technology, mobile platform, video, podcast. And I saw it from then. That, by the way, that app transformed into something we let the blind see. It's called LookTel Money Reader. So if you go on the app iPhone, you can find the app and I can pull it out and it will recognize any money. It'll speak to you, whether it be dollars, pounds, euros.
Wow.
So, so this is the concept of what we call artificial intelligence. I call augmented intelligence. And I wanted to bring that to the paper. I tried 2 years ago and failed, and they promptly called the paper trunk, and I said, okay. And it allowed me, through this opportunity, to take the LA Times as this brand and actually transform it, I hope.
Would you stay with that for a moment? You talked about the LA Times as a brand. It's not just a newspaper, but it's a media brand. What does that mean to you?
It's not a brand in the sense of a marketing brand. It's a brand in the sense of every one of us relates to it. And exactly what you said with regard to local news. I don't really think people realize that LA County, we have 88 cities in this county. One of the best, I just saw this 2 nights ago, SoCal, KCET did a little article or a little TV thing on the LA Times. People have grown up with this, whether you're in sports, whether you're in news, whether you're in food, whether you're in arts, whether you're in culture, whether you're in... And we extend, as Mark says, beyond just LA. We're the Asia Pacific, we're important to China, we're important to Mexico, we're important to Canada. So we have, at that time, 55 million unique viewers. So I think this is a platform as a brand that if we can create and continue the integrity of the paper in the sense that it's something that are actually going to inform, inspire, and aggregate information that is of interest to you, we can actually create what I call a window to the future through California. And to me, we're important to this nation, we're important to the world, actually.
I read you, yeah. You wrote a beautiful letter to readers, and in it, I think you used the word independent 4 or 5 times, that it's important this paper is independent. And yet I know, because I'm a good reporter, that you take a real interest and you have a vision for what this should be. So I'm curious, to the extent that you are shaping some of its vision, how do you think the LA Times can become vibrant again?
Well, I think we've done that by actually, the first thing I needed to do was actually ensure stability. And when I went to the newsroom, and I really felt this is like a beaten child. I mean, they've been through this terrible trauma for years and years and years. And I wanted to ensure that to the newsroom, which is really at the end of the day the heart of the organization, that not only they were important, they were valued. But having said that, we went from 1,200 to 400 in the newsroom. Staff, right. And Washington Post is 800 and New York Times is 1,400. And they've pulled themselves through this. So the first thing was I need to go find the best of the best, and I wasn't shy about it. You know, I went all over the country, and I mean, blessed to have found Norman Pilstein, who's an icon. And together we've now brought on Sewell Chen from New York Times, so we brought in people from Washington Post, and then we just brought in someone from Slate. So we need to bring in people who are blood. But what's amazing, I found that the LA Times alumni that's out there, amazing journalists still out there. So to make it vibrant, we need to bring people back. Then to make it more vibrant is we need to say, and that's what we're actually having our retreat, what is important to us as Californians and Los Angelinos now? What is important? And we are now putting metrics to find out what engages the reader. So the model for me must change in the sense that our audience is not the advertiser. The audience is the reader.
God bless you.
So look, I think Facebook, Google, etc., their business model is the advertiser. And so that is a complete different model which I think we need to move from, because based on that, if your model is advertising and you have the short attention span with the social media, it's going to be hard or impossible to tell the difference between what is disinformation, what is advertising information, what is truthful news. So there needs to be an organization that will step away and said, just like in medicine, I said one of the major dictums for a doctor, the only interest to be considered is the interest of the patient. In this world, the only interest to be considered is the interest of the reader. And if we do that, we will create a loyal audience. We'll be able to trust this paper. And that's why the independence is so important, because we do have people with different opinions. And we need to share and voice all opinions. So that's how I think we'll make this vibrant. There's much more detail than that, but this is how we can make this vibrant.
You've said that, touching on your comments on Google and Facebook, you said in your letter to readers that you said that fake news is the cancer of our time. And you took a pretty hard line on social media, that basically Google and Facebook, I'm paraphrasing, are responsible for spreading disinformation. You're maybe the only media owner I have interacted with who isn't tripling down on, saying the future is tripling down on Google and Facebook and that future. Do you think that there's an option for media in the future that's not about using those platforms?
You know, I even think even more strongly that I think we have to create an alternative option, actually. I think that's one of the challenges, and that's why what excites me about challenges are they are challenges. When people say it's impossible, I really love to sort of go after it. I think it's incredibly important. We have this opportunity to create. In fact, I had dinner with, I'll share with you, with AG 2 nights ago, you know, the owner of the New York Times, the failing New York Times.
Yeah.
And he and I, and he is young, and I said to him, I said, listen, you important, we important, and we were, Washington Post is important, the Atlantic's important, Bloomberg's important. Why could we not act as a Reuters and create a network, a news network, with a stamp of something, a UL stamp of something, to say this article is factual, and create a social network? And that's why, frankly, I'm going into esports, believe it or not, to create some form of social network in which you're not dependent on advertising. I'm particularly concerned about the fact that, and I'm taking them on, I agree, Google and Facebook, etc., are usurping our content without having paying for it, and then hiding behind the fact that they're not a media company. So that's part of the thing. It's a doubling down on the destruction of the paper, actually, because they take the advertising dollars away, they take the content for free, and they face towards the advertisers, and they create they don't create the disinformation, but they don't help in actually preventing the disinformation.
They actually make it very hard to promote news content on Facebook and Google or on those platforms, whereas fake content is much easier to promote, weirdly. So I'm curious, you quickly mentioned it, esports. You've recently made an investment in an esports company, and I've read that you actually think esports can grow into much more than simply offering games to people. It can be a new platform, a new network of its own?
Well, you know, I worry, one of the things I worry as a physician and as a scientist is one of the unintended consequences of technology today, the dark side of it actually, is this mobile platform of short attention span. Mm-hmm. So we have now, and it's almost Darwinian in the sense that anthropologically we've now created generations from 2 years old to teens who don't read, don't write, don't script, don't read a book, and have short attention spans. And I'm convinced that their brains neurologically are rewired through the short synaptic chemical in which they need to get satisfied with short attention spans. I've come to, when I looked at this esports, I knew nothing about esports a year ago. One of the things that fascinated me was it was one of the few activities that they are there for half an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. So maybe there's another way actually to get to this generation and generate longer attention spans. So I wasn't interested in esports for the sake of many people are looking at esports as a monetary, because it is amazingly lucrative, but from a perspective of actually finding a vehicle that could publish into this. So not only did I take over the esports, I took over the esports gaming engine at the mobile level, so that this gaming engine could be a publishing tool, so that we can actually induce the now new stories or even games that would engage in a different way. That's another experiment. And we're going to bring that through the LA Times.
That's bold. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about how much time these kids spend playing, what is it, Fortnite?
Yes.
So I know that that's a digital vision, but I also know that you have this very romantic attachment to print. Is the newspaper of the future, in your mind, a print paper?
I say this often, and I really sincerely mean it. If there's only one newspaper left printing, it's going to be us.
But why?
Because it's a completely different form of reading. I'm sure this audience, with all due respect, you're my age, so it's okay to say, we read the newspaper still. But it's a form what I call leisurely reading. The long form, you know, what we did of the faces of immigration, for example, and you'll sort of see, and I'm now pitching on Sunday a whole section on NBA reviews. The ability to read long form, pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down, or touch it, creates a different tactile and actual intellectual and neurological satisfaction of touching this paper. And I think it's a completely different experience that is not there, no matter how fancy we make the mobile device, how easy we make it to read. So I'm completely convinced that paper will never go away. And I always say that to interviewers who interview me, with all the papers, what do you have in your hands?
It's true. It's easier to, yeah.
Exactly.
It's true. Okay. One of the big debates I've heard in the journalism community here, because every journalist likes to think about the future of the LA Times, is this a local paper that's about LA? Is it a California paper, almost the California Times, that does the whole state because so many local papers are closing around the state? Or is it a national paper that competes with the New York Times and the Washington Post? Do you have an opinion, or do you think that's a false?
No, look, I think at one point during the Chandler days, it was the paper of repute throughout. If you go to Asia today, they still know the word LA Times. They don't know the word Tribune, believe it or not. They know the word the LA Times, right? They didn't know the word trunk for sure. But we have to get our house in order first. I think one of the things, first, as I said, is figure ourselves out in Los Angeles and California. California now is very, very important, especially in this time of election, and where we are as a state. California now is incredibly important as it relates to climate. California is incredibly important as it relates to issues of immigration. California is incredibly important as it relates to this fourth industrial revolution. So I think we owe it to at least be California, but that is clearly not the ambition. We have to be part of the Asia Pacific. We have to be part of China, Canada, Mexico. We have to be a voice for this country. Once we sort of figured out what are the interests, the areas of interest. So just looking at Los Angeles, I think we're the sports nation of the world, of the country. There's nobody with 2 NBA teams, 2 NFL teams, we're going to be the Olympics, and 2 hockey teams, 2 football teams, 2 baseball teams. We're also the food culture country, the city of the nation, and we're the arts and culture, and so there is so much to address for readers. But I think we also have to do very good investigative reporting. I think that's part of the core. I'm worried about a project that I think we've sort of left aside right now. I'll let that out, and hopefully we'll pick it up, about the Exide battery that's downtown LA, where children are still getting sick with lead poisoning. We're ignoring that. We shouldn't ignore stories like that. So, 1, we are Los Angeles. 2, we're Californian. And then we really have to be Asia Pacific. I don't think we can be all things to all people at this point in time. I don't think we can be Washington Post or New York Times. But we have to give a West Coast perspective of the United States.
And do you believe that it's possible? You talked a lot when we were speaking about facts and establishing that there are certain common truths. People can have different points of view and disagree. Do you think it's possible to do that in an era when we are so blue and red? Does the paper have to, in blue California, feel like a blue paper?
Well, you know, it's interesting. We would put out a story, and then I would get a tweet from a person that I know is very conservative and said, that's horrible. And I get a person, the same story from a liberal that said, that's horrible.
Yes. I know. Welcome to journalism.
I think it's so important to differentiate the difference between facts and opinion. I think that's what we need to do. Because facts are what we report. It is what it is. And I liken journalists to scientists. And that's when I really do. And then people say, well, what am I doing? And I think, to me, it's no different from what I've been doing for 20 years of my life. Journalists and scientists both want to discover the facts. They truly want to know the true facts, and they love publishing. And they want to publish the facts. So if that's the case, however, you can take the facts and look at both sides of the facts and come to different conclusions. That's fair enough, and that's an opinion. But then you need to state this is an opinion or an analysis of that fact, which may be the right or wrong analysis. And as long as we're very clear about the opinion. So I've been interviewing a person today for the op-ed page just last week. So that we can actually have an op-ed page may not be the same as even our opinion page, right? So which we may even disagree internally amongst ourselves. In fact, I was very pleased to see that the opinion page of San Diego Tribune disagreed with the opinion page of the LA Times.
Wow.
Right?
Both papers you own.
Yeah. So it says that everybody can have an opinion, believe it or not. It's just a fact of life. So the importance, however, is to very clearly differentiate. I'll share with you a opportunity that I think I wanted to do personally, is create another opinion called second opinion.
Like in medicine?
Like in medicine. So we could create a column called second opinion. I also want to bring back the thing called the first column, which we had in the paper, which was the story of the day, and a very important story, whether it's a columnist or so, you know, I think the importance is for people to go to the paper and says, you know, if I at least want to read about facts, I'm not going to get, if I'm going to read about opinion, I know it's an opinion.
I've read that you've said owning these papers is in a way a public trust, but you've also said that it's a business. So this is not an act of charity. You see this as a revenue center. Where do you find the money? This is the question. When I'm out talking about media, everyone says, how do you monetize that?
Right. So I recall my life as under the Catholic nuns where it says no money, no mission. And so it is not a charity. It can't be a charity. It can't be because I have wealth and so therefore I can make grants, because that's not sustainable. So we have to then find ways, and the only way I believe is what is important about our paper is storytelling. We are the storytellers of facts, opinion, culture, and if we can engage enough people, think about it, we have 13 million in Los Angeles alone, 30 million people, fifth largest economy. We have a bigger market size than New York Times. They have 2.3 million digital viewers now.
Wow.
That generates $230 million of revenue, which could be plowed back into the newsroom. We need to get there to $1 million to $2 million of digital readers and earn their loyalty. And I'm willing to plow every penny back into the newsroom so that we can do that.
That's great.
Okay. But I don't consider that charity. I consider that sustainability, where we have all a shared responsibility. And that's what why I'm saying when you ask about how do you rejuvenate it, we need to bring people who are really committed to wanting to actually see that vision through, because it's a shared responsibility.
It sounds like there are also multiple revenue streams. You've talked about the LA Times complex. Is that what it's called? Would you explain what that is?
So we took over the DirecTV building in El Segundo, and I made that into the newsroom, by the way, in 5 months, which is like terrifying. And then I thought there is no way that if we're not going to go after advertising, that we need to find another revenue stream. And there was another 100,000 square foot building right next door, so immediately we bought that. And now we have 10 acres on the same campus. I'm going to convert that into what I call the Times Media Group. And what I want to do there is create that as a convening hub for the community to come to. In this 100,000 square foot facility, we're going to build a 200-seat theater so that we can have the envelope, we can have screenings, we can have people. I'm going to build a stage where we can have presidential debates or just debates. And I'm going to build an esports arena where we can have people come and watch this esports. So that we have the book festival. We have 150,000 people show up in 3 days. We have the food bowl. We do 90 events a year. So this has to be another form of a revenue stream that could supplement and support the newsroom again. There's always been, I saw that in 2011 when Kathy Thompson and Dave One were the editors and she was the publisher. This, how dare you belittle yourself by doing this little other stuff? And it's now very important in survival. So podcasts, over-the-top TV, and I'll just share with you, we're actually going to launch our own TV network.
LA Times TV?
LA Times Today.
Wow, like a 24-hour news channel?
We are going to start with 1 hour and then maybe go to 2 hours and 3 hours, and maybe you could host a show.
I just got a job. Wow. Okay. Obviously, you think big. So would you give us, just dial it back for a moment and tell us your big vision, your 3 pillars of change?
Well, as I was sharing with you over dinner, I think it's hard for people to understand what you asked the right question, what drives me into. And I think the impact that I've seen, and I've really had this blessing coming to this country, being an immigrant, coming to UCLA, and inventing. And as part of the space shuttle, I developed this protein nanoparticle for breast cancer and lung cancer. I took over the National Lambda Rail, which ran the Large Hadron Collider. And so I had this strange engineering bent and curiosity. And I sold everything in 2008 because I came to realize that we were going to go into this, what I call the 4th Industrial Revolution. And it's complicated, but I'm trying to put together a tagline which explains networks, and it's as follows. If you can figure out a way to move photons, which is the sun, and they move electrons, which is electricity, and move bits, which is fiber, and create synapses, which is augmented intelligence, you can literally change lives. And it's actually a uniform system of moving photons, moving electrons, moving bits, creating synapses, augmenting intelligence. And it turned out that broke into three little big areas that'll face mankind. And I asked myself, what will affect my children, my grandchildren, 3 or 4 generations of mankind? And one is clearly health. And within health, there are 3 elements: cancer, Alzheimer's, and actually infectious disease that could wipe us all out. On the cancer side, I'll come back to maybe the health side. And then the second one was, the other thing that's going to wipe us out is hydrocarbons, the climate change. And how could we affect, based on my biological knowledge, hydrocarbons? And then the third one, as we talked about here, is we need to educate, inspire, and using these moving bits and this machine vision for democracy and creating a media and entertainment. So these are the 3 pillars that drive us. 1, on the healthcare; 2, figuring out how to actually change this energy; and 3rd is the media. On healthcare, that's what you probably know me most for. The element, again, I was going against the grain, that if you think of the assumptions of, and this is what's been bothering me for 25 years, one of the earliest my training was the immune system, because I was working on diabetes, and I always believed that diabetes is an autoimmune disease. And I started to learn about diabetes, but I was also working on cancer. And I discovered that actually in my mind, in my research, that cancer was just the flip side of autoimmune disease, where your immune system was being suppressed. I started getting into the genomic sequencing and then realized that all of us are making stem cells. I then realized that mathematically your body, it's impossible for your body not to make a mistake every day, every second of every day, in making what I call a transformed cell. If that was the case, then every one of us would actually have cancer at the age of 5, which means then that there is something in our body protecting us from cancer. And it turned out to be a cell called the natural killer cell. So that cell, and I published this in 1990, is floating around your body right now in this room, protecting your body from cancer. Then if you take that logic further and says, okay, but we've been trained to give you high-dose chemotherapy and high-dose radiation. And it turns out that high-dose chemotherapy and high-dose radiation wipes out all the natural killer cells. And then the question came to me was, oh my God, it is possible that inadvertently, through our training, based on false assumptions, that our high-dose chemotherapy has been actually causing metastasis. Is it possible that maybe for 40 years, we've been going down the wrong path and inadvertently giving the patient high-dose chemotherapy and actually causing metastasis because we've wiped out the immune system? That's a very controversial, difficult statement for me to say to my colleagues. So I decided in 2008 to shut everything down and create a skunkworks program in Culver City, where now we have 25 acres, and in El Segundo, where we have 40 acres, to actually find a solution and prove the theory that in fact we should not be giving patients high-dose chemotherapy, that in fact if we could build a natural killer cell as a universal killer cell, that in fact if we can find a sequence and target the natural killer cell to the cancer, we can hang a bag of blood called natural killer cells and treat cancer. And I'll be presenting that data in November. For 75 patients. Now let me tell you the conflict I have. So I called Norm Pilstein and I said, we can't break this news in the LA Times. I have to call my friends at the New York Times to break this news.
And you did.
And I did that for the energy side, for the battery. And I called Mark Lacey, and Mark is a good friend, is in the New York Times, and Dean Baquet. And I said, listen, I'm going to the One Planet, and I've been invited by President Macron. I'm going to make this big announcement with Jim Kim at the World Bank. and maybe we can make the New York Times great again.
It's generous of you.
Actually, I was so excited, he gave me this reporter, Ivan Pell. Oh, he did a magnificent story, he really did. And sadly for us, it got 200,000 page views.
With your last story in the New York Times. I think I want to bring in the audience to ask some questions. My last question for you is bringing it back to the media. I would just love to hear you explain what you think your responsibility is to the public as the owner of the LA Times.
I think we owe the public a little bit of a moral compass. We owe them because if you look at this KCAL episode, there's corruption, there's elements. I want to be the voice of the underdog, very much. The voice of the voiceless. But we also owe the public interest, right, and information. I think I owe the public inspiration. And most of all, I think we owe them integrity.
Thank you. So we have time now for questions from the audience, and I think there are microphones. So if you'll raise your hand, and then maybe we can go boy, girl. This is my thing. Otherwise, we don't get girls asking questions. Yes, in the back over there. Microphone's coming to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much for coming tonight. Steve Miska. Researchers have indicated that the closure of small hometown newspapers have contributed to a loss in public confidence in the media writ large. Do you feel you have an obligation to help support local California hometown newspapers?
I think very much so, right? And for small town newspapers, it truly is. If you think it's tough LA Times, it's almost impossible for small town newspapers because they're really dependent on advertising. They would hand this out for free, almost as a community system. So the answer is yes. We have an obligation where we could share our information and create cross-information across. McClatchy is trying to sort of do that and continue themselves with small town, and I know it's in the public domain that McClatchy and I are talking about how I could help them and how they could help us. So the answer is yes. I think we have some obligation to do that.
Great. Question, is there a woman who has a question? Science shows if you don't ask, women don't raise their hands. Over here, yeah.
Thank you. I'm a researcher, and so I am wondering if you are doing any kind of research to look at how LA Times could become a sustainable glocal media. So you did mention that you're looking to have a prominent presence in Asia Pacific, and and Canada, Mexico, I believe. So that does make it that. But what does it take to make it a sustainable glocal media?
So you're talking about local? Is that
I think
Glocal, so global
Global.
and local.
Well, I think we first have to capture enough of an audience in California, if there is a sustainable audience in California, to actually grow the newspaper. But we are starting, for example, as you know, we just launched a report in Singapore. We're looking, we did a good piece in the Middle East. But I don't think we have the capacity, not that we have the desire, but we don't have the capacity immediately. So I think expectations have to be set. That what we need to do is capture both local and Californian news, importantly, and national news. I think it's very important. We want now with Sewell, and we need to strengthen our Washington bureau a little bit to have an important national presence as well. Doesn't mean we'll stay just a California presence.
Let's see. Yes, and then I hate pointing, but this way.
Good evening, Dr. Soon-Shiong. My name is Luis Madrazo. I'm a former chief economist at the Mexican Ministry of Finance. And it was very impressive, the interview. The interviewee is excellent as well. And you told us about the great things human beings can do when they put their minds to it, a brilliant mind, if I may add. And it's very inspiring. But when you were talking about the role that the LA Times can play for the local community, it brought me to something that happened today. I was lucky enough to be invited to be a speaker this morning. I spoke about Mexico. A year and a half ago, I was here in this very same ballroom talking about Mexico, and people were very worried about the relationship between Mexico and the United States. I think we've had an election, and things have gone off the radar. But I truly believe that the largest challenges to California and to the United States right now are the things that we could do to ourselves, the mistakes we could make, and the tension regarding immigration between Mexico and the US. It went unsaid. You mentioned immigration, you mentioned Mexico, but I think the worst thing we could do in the United States and in California would be to not have great relationships with Mexico, just from a geopolitical...
May I ask for the question?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I just want to get to a lot of people.
And my question is, you did mention Mexico. Yes, she is very tough. The question is, what role will California, Los Angeles, and the Los Angeles Times play in putting behind us this tension? I think the new negotiations regarding NAFTA are one step forward. And do you think we can put that behind us? And what role do you think California, Los Angeles, and the LA Times can play?
I think California, LA Times can play an important role. I think what you just raised with regard to immigration, the economics, even the language, the healthcare. Look, I don't think we as Californians, if we were honest ourselves, could have survived and thrived without the Mexican immigration and the workers that helped this state. So I think the opportunity now, we were trying to think what we can do. We just launched, and we're about to launch and build on LA Times en Espanol, so that there is both a crossover where I don't know if we will get there, where the paper is bilingual, so that people can understand the issues. The Hispanic community, as you know, in LA is one of the largest, if not the largest in the country. And so I think when Jessica asked me what's our obligation, that is clearly one of the most important obligations, to sort of figure out the relationships on our border. But those relationships are actually, it's right in our cities, and that's what I talk about, the Exide Battery area. It's largely Latino population. I work with Father John downtown. When you talk about local, the Resurrection Church down there in the inner city, in the Boyle Heights. I think we have, as a paper, a obligation to actually extend. We have an amazing metro department that goes all the way there, but the international relations that goes with the local relations, I see it's so important to have that level of understanding. So I'm always a half full kind of person. I think all this will pass. All of this is a blip in the history. And I think Mexico is too important a neighbor for us not to have good relations.
Here's a question over here.
Hi, my name is Tess Benko. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I'm wondering if the LA Times has specific plans, seeing as how this is the largest population of military and veterans in the nation, to represent those in the LA Times.
The veterans?
Yes.
So you may know that, or may not know, but I trained as a VA surgeon. So when I did the islet cell transplant, pancreas transplant, I was a VA surgeon. I think it's also not very commonly known that I've never billed a patient in my life. I've always been an academic, salaried surgeon.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Not too smart.
You've done okay.
So I think it's disgusting, actually. I'm very worried about the... if you go down Wadsworth, VA Wadsworth, Los Angeles, and you see veterans lying in the street. So the homelessness of the veterans, which is really an underlying pinning of mental illness. So the mental health and the homelessness issue is something we have as a country, as a nation, amazing obligation. So we are clearly addressing, and I was just talking, we write a lot about the homeless, but really, I was just saying to Norm, we need to write not a lot about, well, there's homeless. What are the solutions? We need to sort of find, and this is again another obligation, what are the solutions that we could maybe suggest or even push for? And be muscular in those opinions. Sometimes you're going to have opinions that we're going to say, this is what you should be doing. So the answer is absolutely, we owe that as an obligation.
Do we have time for more? There's a question up front here. Who has the closest mic? There.
Thank you. Peter Lawhorn, Conrad Hilton Foundation, and a member of the board of the Pacific Council. You have a room here of several hundred people who are passionate about the idea of LA as a global city. When we hear Mayor Garcetti describing it as the most diverse city of in the history of the world, 200 ethnic groups, 40% of global trade to the US coming through our ports, and yet Los Angeles does not realize that it is potentially a global powerhouse. What can the LA Times do to help LA come to that realization, and how can the Pacific Council work with you on that?
I'm glad you asked, actually. Think about the population when you look at the Koreans, the largest Korean population outside of Seoul. And you look at, we just did a health clinic where we had a Mongolian population and 200 people showed up with hepatitis. So people don't realize what a melting pot we are. As I said, we have 88 cities. So one of the, and I will be coming to you if you say that about the LA Times is going to do, and I don't want to steal our thunder, but by October the 20th, that time frame, or maybe the first week of November, we will probably, hopefully, make an announcement. This is all off the record, right?
Yes.
Okay.
This is off the record.
This is not being streamed live?
No,
or
it's
anything?
streamed live, no tweeting, no Instagramming.
Okay. It is being streamed live. Oh, it is being streamed live?
It is?
Okay.
I was told it's off the record. Okay.
Oops, well, I take back everything I said.
Forgive me. Fake news. Sorry.
So then I won't break news here. But we are trying to do something, and the first week of November, I want to try and do something to inspire the global population that LA Times is a center of the globe from a global melting pot. And I've been advocating personally with certain organizations that I can't break the news now. And I am hopeful that by October, the end of October, they will say we have been awarded something, we as a city, that will allow us to showcase the global nature of the city.
Okay.
But I can't tell you what.
That's a good tease. And tonight has been wonderful. I think we all want to thank you for reinvigorating independent journalism in Los Angeles and your commitment to bringing integrity into our free press here. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's okay.